It's the off season and nothing is happening, so let's get into some discourse, baby. This is probably one of the best time-killing things that we can do in the summer of no activity. It's going over onto the subreddits of various NHL teams and just reading some of the conversation going on over here. Today we're talking about the Vancouver Canucks. We're talking about Patrik Allvin. We're talking about Jim Rutherford and how these guys just weren't it for the Vancouver Canucks as managers, as presidents, as people that would communicate the franchise's vision, day-to-day operations, and intention to the media. And there are a number of examples, but obviously the biggest and probably the boldest example is what went down with Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. Let's dive into this post made by Elastoid on the Canucks subreddit from yesterday. Can you remember a management group that handled the media worse than Patrik Allvin and Jim Rutherford? Now, I'll just say my own piece here before actually reading this post, but Patrik Allvin will go down in my brain as probably the most boring Vancouver Canucks general manager that I have seen in my lifetime. Like, to be fair, I was born in the year 2000. I only started watching the Canucks in 2011. So my run as a Canucks fan consisted of Mike Gillis, whom, let's be real, when you're 11 years old, how much are you paying attention to the general manager going out there and saying stuff in the media? Not much, unless you're probably just smarter than I was, to be honest. But Mike Gillis, pretty cool dude, pretty smart dude, really innovative guy, somebody that changed what Vancouver hockey had the potential of being. Next up, there was Jim Benning, who, look, I guess we could generally say now, goodness gracious, like, bless Jim Benning. The guy has a Stanley Cup to his name after all, but man, this may be the worst Vancouver Canucks manager ever. Like, if we're just being real here, you talk about the intention and the timeline and the mistakes and the failed trades, and then you talk about the way he handled the media. Jim Benning, it feels like a lot of the times when he would speak in front of the microphones with Canucks reporters, the guy got nothing but rocks in his head. Like, it just didn't feel like this guy knew what he was talking about most of the time. And then after Benning got the can, it was Rutherford, who was the general manager in practice for a little bit, right before Patrik Allvin got officially hired. So Rutherford's small stint as the GM, I don't think that really counts. Meanwhile, Patrik Allvin, this guy was not really all too informational. Like, you talk about some of the commentary that he would provide to the media, he wouldn't reveal a thing about what the Canucks were thinking about doing, and from a certain standpoint, I think fans were happy to see that. It's like, Jim Benning was so brutally honest most of the time that it's a nice change of pace to get a guy who just doesn't reveal his hand at all. And Patrik Allvin was that guy. Steve Yzerman in Detroit, he has that reputation of, nobody is going to know what Yzerman is thinking, partly because his crew is sealed tight like a vault, but it's also because Steve Yzerman doesn't give anything to the media. If Patrik Allvin could do that too, then that'd be great. But guess what? Patrik Allvin may not have said stuff to the media, but Jim Rutherford definitely did. One of the biggest blabbermouths in hockey at 77 years old, a guy whose reputation has been built for himself as one of the biggest gossipers in the sport, and a guy who was stepping into the Vancouver Canucks president of hockey ops role, and a franchise that had some really interesting ups and downs from the get-go. Let's be real, it was mostly downs, but there was a season where the Canucks were really good and there were no issues, at least not that we've been made aware of up to this point. But let's go out there and read what the Reddit post goes out there and says. Elastoid says that Vancouver media will talk a story to death. If you make a single comment, there will be media speculation, exaggeration, insinuation, and then some Starbucks baristas making dumb comments to players when they're seen around town. It's frequent, it's predictable, it's been known to affect the mentalities of some players. For example, when Luongo was the Canucks captain. The media can be brutal. Allvin and Rutherford were huge fans of pouring gasoline on small fires. Remember when they were trying to sign Bo Horvat to an extension and he went on an absolute tear and Allvin dogged him to the media, suggesting he was overinflating his value and then contract talks suddenly dried up and he had to be traded? How about when Pettersson and Miller were first having issues, and players said it was overblown, not a big deal, all a bunch of rumors, until Jim Rutherford came out and said it was a problem, contradicting the players and making the whole thing into a circus. How about when Allvin didn't trade Besser and then said in a post-deadline interview, if I had told you what they offered me, then I'd have to run out of the room because you wouldn't believe me, implying that no one was really interested in Besser, which soured their relationship and led to his almost leaving for nothing. How about when Rutherford was asked a run-of-the-mill question about extending Hughes, and instead of saying the usual, yeah, that's a priority and we're working with his camp but he's focused on the season, he said, Hughes wants to go play with his brothers, thus triggering a year-long Will Hughes leaves circus. I didn't hate all the moves they made, but it feels like they didn't hesitate to throw a player to the media wolves if it served their purposes. And that's one of the things that I think is going to change with the new regime, the Sedins and Ryan Johnson, these guys that seem to implement a lot more respectful nature with the way they interact with the media and the players in the organization. The way Allvin handled the Miller situation was awful and baffling. Allvin said that JT Miller is taking a leave of absence, and we ask everyone to respect his privacy and not prod. The media says, okay. A week later, after no one is talking at all about Miller, Allvin says, hey, here's some completely unprompted tea that I'm going to drop on Miller for literally no reason. They treated it like a mental health or family issue and guilt-tripped anyone for asking questions, only for it to turning out to being a team-mandated suspension for being an a-hole. That's the moment I lost all respect for that management team. Another reply says that Jim Rutherford started off on the wrong foot with the whole saga he had with Bruce Boudreau. What a mess that was. They were an embarrassment. I'm not an Elias Pettersson guy, but Rutherford and Allvin handled his issues so poorly. How about shut your mouths and keep issues in-house? PA and JR's communication skills were equivalent to Benning's GM skills? Yeah, okay. I'm not going to disagree, to be honest. Jim Rutherford spoke too much, and Allvin had problems with the language, but Benning was still miles worse. Every single time he spoke, he showed how incompetent he was. I actually think that Rutherford was worse personally, another comment said. Benning had more of a problem with the fact that he didn't do any media, and our team captain and coach had to handle things they weren't supposed to. I think this comment from Knucklehead 1997 sums up everything you need to know, and it's the holistic bow-on-top idea that sums it all up. The bigger issue is JR being somebody who just speaks his mind. That isn't good for a team in the modern era with social media, and Vancouver being such a hockey city. It makes me hopeful that with this new regime, the focus on good people makes me think this kind of stuff is done. As far as Allvin denying the rift and JR contradicting him, it's obvious that Allvin was lying and trying to shift the narrative, and Jim Rutherford just spoke the truth when he shouldn't have. Yeah, so, I'm not going to say that any of that stuff is defendable at this point. The Pettersson and Miller thing seems to have blown up a lot more in the media, at least, because of how the president and the general manager communicated or didn't communicate it at all. And then you talk about just the actual instructions themselves, how these guys told Miller that, hey, Pettersson's on this new contract. We need to toughen him up. You, Miller, you're the guy. You're going to go out there and you're going to do this. You're going to be in charge of getting the man out of Elias Pettersson. And then you had Quinn Hughes, the captain, who didn't really do much at all in regards to the leadership part of it all. It was just a mess. And I think now this overarching idea of Allvin and Rutherford's media relationship having an impact on the team's story, it's something we're going to have a lot of fun looking at over the next few years as we try to move away from this era of Canucks hockey. With all that said, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Allvin and Jim Rutherford's tenure in Vancouver and how their relationships were with the media? Rutherford, of course, is still with the Canucks, but in a much more low-key role. We'll see whether or not the leaks stop fully heading into the next few years, I guess. But you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.